Over the last 2 years, many countries all over the world have upgraded copper, nickel, and now gold to their strategic critical metals list, meaning these are now items of national security. Now, why does this matter? This matters because in the event of a global recession, some countries are going to get hit a lot harder than others, and desperate times will call for desperate measures. There will be countries whose economies have crashed, whose currencies have dropped in value, but they have operating mines inside their borders, and they will look at that operating gold mine and say, that sure looks like a printing press to me. I'm going to take that. How big of a threat is resource nationalization in this next cycle? That's what I talk about with my guest today, who is an absolute legend in the metals and energy business, having built several companies that delivered 10x returns for his shareholders in silver, platinum group metals, and a multi-billion-dollar exit in natural gas. His name is Dr. Thomas Kaplan, and he is the chairman of NovaGold, who coincidentally very recently completed another billion-dollar transaction with his business partner, John Paulson, to acquire the Donlin gold project in Alaska from Barrick Mining. Phenomenal conversation. You're going to learn a lot, and he shares some real gems at the end, true wisdom after so many decades of making tremendous money in the mining sector. Here is Dr. Thomas Kaplan. Enjoy.
This is Jay Martin.
Okay, here I am with Thomas Kaplan. Tom, thanks so much for making the time today.
It's a pleasure, Jay. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Well, I'm looking forward to this, and there's many different directions that I want to go. You spent decades in the natural resource industry as a hyper successful investor and entrepreneur spanning energy and metals, but you're also a credentialed historian. And so here's where I want to start today. I just want to understand your worldview a little bit. Let me ask you an open-ended question, and then I'm just going to pull on some threads. From a geopolitical standpoint, Tom, right now, there's many headlines we could follow. What's catching your attention geopolitically today?
At the present time, I would say that the big question that I'm trying to pursue is how quickly do empires die? And the more that I'm studying this, I'm actually taking it back right to ancient roots, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. They die rather quickly. And I'm trying to see whether I can mesh an understanding of imperial decline into a congenial adaptation of Ray Dalio's forecasts on how countries go bankrupt and how we are going to, at one point, have a financial heart attack of some sort. All of these, I have to say, are not for purposes of trying to profit from them. My personal wealth and portfolio, at least in terms of my business, is really only entirely precious metals. And we express that through mining. It's really to just understand how I can advise some of my friends who are running countries to be prepared for the various things along the decision tree that they're going to have to confront.
Now, that's very interesting. So if we're following Dalio's framework and his book, what was it? How Empires Fall. It's a rendition of that. I'm failing on the name, but he studied the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Dutch and the British, and then took those blueprints and lays them over the American empire, asking the question, where might we be today if we can find this repetition of similar events in every preceding empire? Where are we today? And what struck me is one of the most interesting thoughts coming out of that exercise was there's no Western Christian empire to follow America. So there's going to be a changing world order. Hard to predict when, but we just listed 5 empires in the last 600 years. So gives you a bit of sense of the expeditious nature that puck gets passed. But would this be an even bigger shift? Because it's not just a change of a global world order from one sort of Western European country to another, but there's really no Western allied nation to pick up the baton. And so with this shift, do you think this global shift will be bigger and more disruptive and less predictable? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that the issue of whether it's white or Christian is necessarily that important. There have been empires that have been neither, that have been benevolent forces in the world. I mean, the Persian Empire, for example, occupied probably 40% of mankind, and they were a benevolent force. So what I would say, though, is that it's a question of with whom you share not only common interests, but common values. So the American empire has been built on several factors that unfortunately are being undermined. Some have been undermined slowly, and others are being undermined very quickly and all at once. Hence, my original answer to your question that this is what I'm trying to study. Now, let's put aside anything, regarding Republicans, Democrats, or the like. This is not that issue. The underpinnings of American power were created by Republicans and Democrats, and the degradation of American power has been enabled by Republicans and Democrats. But what we have right now, I think, is a situation where there is a complete disconnect intellectually with an understanding of what the underpinnings of American power are. So I'm going to be a little bit simplistic, but essentially there are three aspects that make the United States special, broadly. Okay, we'll use a finer brush stroke in a moment, broadly. Number one is the ability to project military power across the world more efficaciously than any other country for the time being. And that's going to be challenged in relatively short order, but for the time being, that's true. This is extremely important because the role that America plays as the, quote, global policeman is absolutely integral to its power base. And contrary to the oft-repeated mantra that the world is taking advantage of us, the truth is that we get an exceptional benefit by being the indispensable military power. Number two, something that we enjoy that China, for example, does not, and that is an international alliance system of countries which are like-minded and willing to work together with common goals and, by and large, share American values. So in that, you would include Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, NATO, so that would also include Canada, etc. This is something that is unique to the United States. Part of the reason why we have this alliance system is because of the first element, and that is our ability to be able to provide a proverbial Article 5 to these countries. Article 5 being the proviso in the NATO commitments that there would be common defense. And that essentially it's an American nuclear guarantee. Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to that network of alliances, you also have multilateral institutions, which the United States created, and therefore which have benefited the United States. And then there is something that apparently these days is viewed as, almost pusillanimous, and that is the pursuit of having shared values. Soft power is extremely important. It translates into immense financial power. The fact that the United States shares values with and can protect the countries that it's in an alliance with is extremely important, because that goes to the heart of the third pillar, which is the one that, if undermined, causes everything else to unravel, and that is the US dollar. And the problem that we have right now is that, contrary to popular belief, the United States profits disproportionately for its disproportionate expenditure on defense, for example. Being the global policeman, being the one who has the alliance system underpinned, is what allows the United States, with anywhere from 50 to 60% of the world's currency reserves, to get the world to not only sell us stuff for the dollar, but also take those dollars and keep them in reserves. US GDP, the US percentage of global trade, let's just say both are 20, 25%. And I could be generous here or there, but we know that the dollar is held disproportionately. Why? Because of those other ancillary aspects that allow for all of these countries to be able to provide the United States with a quid pro quo that benefits the United States at least as much as they receive benefits from spending less on defense in return for the Article 5.
Right.
And if we lose sight of this, we're going to find out that, number one, the Chinese are arming at an astonishing pace. It's going to take us a very long time for our military industries to be able to retool quickly enough to be able to challenge that remarkable Chinese ability to build things quickly and reasonably well. I mean, the performance of Chinese fighter jets in the Indo-Pakistani war, or skirmish, of a month or so ago is going to transform the arms industry. Now, then you have the other aspect, which is that we need these friends. Otherwise, we become overstretched. We provide an umbrella, but the sinews are there. I have no problem with getting Europe to pay more and getting everybody to pay more. But this idea that they have been freeloading completely denies the reality that the United States has received tremendous benefits from the services that it provides. And we don't understand this in the United States. Henry Kissinger got it right when he said, we are becoming historically illiterate. We are beyond illiterate historically. And until we understand that we are as much a part of the big con, the Ponzi scheme, the quid pro quo, we're going to lose the supremacy of the dollar, and the destruction of wealth could be enormous. Now, let me just put this into perspective. For years, people would ask me, into which currency should I be denominated? Which is what Soros said is the existential question for an investor. And my response was, you should, if you want paper currencies, they're all toilet tissue, but the dollar is double ply for a variety of reasons. And then there's gold, which to me is really the only currency that makes any sense. Let's just put crypto and all of that aside. And in reality, the dollar was, with some outliers like the Swiss and franc, etc., the best currency to own. And when I would say to people dollar and gold, they would say, well, you need a weak dollar for gold to shine. And I would say, complete myth. There are a lot of myths about gold. That's one of them. There are several others which have been belied, over the years. You can own both. I don't know any more about the dollar because, you know better than anybody else. These are relative instruments. But I do believe against gold, the dollar will absolutely collapse.
So thank you for that. So to pick apart the three underpinnings supporting the United States global power today, military power, number one, and still they lead the world in advanced military technology. I've got some questions about that. And you alluded to that maybe being a bit short-lived, depending on how things play out here. But having that military power allows us to have the international alliance system, the pursuit of shared values, because countries can rely on the United States for protection if it comes up. And the third pillar being the US dollar, This is where a lot of folks maybe get confused, and the rhetoric coming from the White House or the podiums in general is that we've got a bad deal. We're supporting all these nations with military power and getting nothing in return. Well, what we're getting in return is effectively debt, right? These countries are willing to buy United States treasuries and continue to finance the American empire, right? Without that trade, the empire stumbles very, very quickly. So at the beginning of this conversation, you said you're trying to understand how quickly empires die and that you've determined they can die rather quickly. And you said the underpinnings of the United States, some are dying slowly and some are dying quickly. Could we lay that over these three underpinnings and say military power, shared value system, and US dollar? Would that work, Tom, to say this is dying fast, that's dying slow of these three pillars of the American empire?
So the military power, I'm not going to say it's dying. I have a lot of faith in the capacity of the American military, the American intelligence agencies.
Could I ask you a question about that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So when I think through the last sort of 100 years of American military pursuits, that the last, could you make the argument that the last concise victory was World War II? And since then, there's been a lot of, ambiguous battles and some political wins, but generally speaking, more ambiguous entanglements. But World War II was maybe the last major win for the United States military. The reason I might bring that up is because before that, the United States didn't lead the world in advanced weapons, but it led the world in manufacturing ability. And that's why it was able to be so effective in World War II, because at the rate with which they could produce the ships, the planes, the missiles, all of it, right? And today, the manufacturing ability is like 2% of global manufacturing. It's almost nothing, Any substance to that thought, or what do you think?
Again, I would say, number one, you're absolutely correct. The American track record in warfare is, how should we put it? It's a theological gray area. So America is great at winning battles, but has been unsuccessful in winning wars. And part of that, again, comes back to the historical ignorance of American policymakers, just not understanding the elements of the that need to be reckoned with an adversary. So H.R. McMaster, who's an excellent, philosopher soldier, said that we need to pursue strategic empathy rather than strategic narcissism. America, typically speaking, if you look back at our wars, has been strategically narcissistic. Korea, I think, is something of a gray area because there were certain decisions, that proved to be wrong, but were completely understandable in context. Vietnam, complete misunderstanding of those three aspects that you need to have in order to have strategic empathy, which is to say, understanding the history, the geography, and the politics of your rivals or of your adversaries. And we've made that mistake in other places. Obviously, Iraq, the powers that be thought that they were going to be met with rose petals, as the Humvees, buzz through on the way to Baghdad. And for a day or two, they do get rose petals. But then you encounter the limits of power, primarily because you really didn't understand the demographics of the country. Same for Afghanistan. We won that war, like we won the war in Iraq, until we didn't, because the battles get won, but the wars get lost. The wars get lost because we don't understand that nation building, which now has a very, very bad rap, is a function of context. So if you're dealing with a homogenous society like Japan, you can remake Japan in America's image. Even Germany, roughly. I mean, they've got a lot of regional differences. But Afghanistan is a patchwork quilt, which, if anyone was looking at this logically, would have said the only thing that might have a chance is the restoration of a monarchy that all of the tribal leaders can rally around as being an independent arbiter. Similarly, in Iraq, Iraq is a confection. It was a colonial confection. Sure, Mesopotamia itself is a region, but Iraq is comprised of three different demographics: Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, primarily. We didn't understand any of that. Should have. It's not like it was a secret. It's not like you had to read the entrails of a slaughtered griffin vulture. It was there for us to understand. But when you don't have people who are humble enough, modest enough to do the basic homework to understand why you're going to get blowback, then when you engage in nation building, which in some cases can work, you have to understand why it's not going to work. And Americans tend to be sort of a, can-do people. And then they ultimately end up leaving with their tails between their legs.
How much do you think that's impacted the sort of global reputation of America? And then in parallel with today's trade aggression, is the international alliance system at risk today and the pursuit of shared values? Are people questioning what are our shared values? It feels like we were an ally and now we're an enemy.
Well, I think you've just put it very well and succinctly. You are not going to have an enduring alliance system when you beat the hell out of your allies. And in the last few months, our allies who became dependent on us, and legitimately so. Alliances are about mutual dependency. We shouldn't criticize countries for being dependent. We shouldn't take that as a weakness. We created that codependency because, as I've said, there were mutual benefits to be had. We're dependent on you for this, but meanwhile, you're dependent on us for accepting the primacy of the dollar. So I think everything that's happened over the last few months, really everything, has shaken the core of the American alliance system. And this is a pity because from a cost-benefit analysis, the extra money that we spend on defending the world versus the economic benefits that we get make it justifiable. But it's also what the cost is going to be as these other countries realize that they can no longer count on the full faith and credit of the United States, either financially or militarily. That's a problem because if you are a country that previously thought that there was absolutely no daylight between you and the United States on mutual defense, you don't need nuclear weapons. If, on the other hand, that becomes blurred and opaque, then all of a sudden you have to take into account what is the calculus that China is making? What is the calculus that the Russians are making with regard to that American security guarantee? Maybe we have to go nuclear. Well, one of the beauties of the American military primacy is that we made it unnecessary for most countries to have to go nuclear because of that network. The day a nuclear bomb goes off for one reason or another, the US stock market falls by 70%. It's not in our interest to do anything to rock the boat. And yet, that's what's happening. Any country that previously thought that the United States was 100% reliable has to now start looking at unconventional weapons. Not good. This is short-term thinking. And as I said, I don't even believe that it's justified in the short term.
Let me ask you about, do you have any thoughts on the motivation then, Tom? What do you think is the intent behind this trade strategy?
Look, patriotism is a very beautiful thing. Nationalism almost always leads to blinkered thinking, intolerance to ideas. King Solomon's proverb, amongst others, was as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. When you beat them like a baby seal, your friends are not inclined to tell you the truth. They're inclined to blow smoke in your direction. The most important asset that a leader can have, this applies to whether he's CEO of a company or president or prime minister, is to be able to have friends domestically and internationally who can go and say, look, thou art mortal, Caesar. This is wrong. That's a true friend. A true friend is not someone who tells you that you're right when they actually think you're wrong. That friend is worse than an enemy because it lulls you into a false sense of security. You know, you must listen most closely to your critics. The ancient Antisthenes said, listen most closely to those who know your weaknesses best, because they will have studied them more closely and you can learn something. It's a rhetorical question. Do you really think that the environment that we have now is one that's conducive to people standing up and saying the emperor has no clothes? That is extremely bad. And in no case historically have I ever seen that movie has a happy ending.
The smartest investors know that real wins come from thinking independently and spotting opportunities long before the crowd. And that's what we teach at the Commodity University. When you talk about, call it weapons diplomacy, right? The United States provides weapons in exchange for purchases of United States debt. Has China been running somewhat of a parallel program with their Belt and Road Initiative? Do you see any common ground there where I think as of today, the United States supplies weapons to 103 countries and the Belt and Road Initiative has invested in about 150. So it's infrastructure diplomacy versus weapons diplomacy. And I think it was born out of 2008 when China woke up and saw the US and Europe in economic rehab, and they were sitting on unsold inventory because their customers weren't buying. And so they thought maybe we can build up the next generation of consumer bases. And is that a competitive, I think, are we now seeing this put to the test? Is this an international alliance system as strong as weapons diplomacy has been for the last 60 years? What do you think?
I agree with you. I think it's a great observation. The Chinese reckoned that they were not prepared and did not want to embark upon anything that would lead to the perception that China was becoming an overmighty subject. That is to say, up until relatively recently, the Chinese would refer to themselves as a developing country. They did everything possible, which was a dictum of Deng Xiaoping. Do everything you can, stay low key. Bide your time, build up your strength. There's no reason to create fear or envy. And it was a great strategy. By the way, it's not a bad way to live even. I mean, in the case of Chinese Communist Party, it's obviously, built on cynicism, but keep a low profile, speak softly, but meanwhile, start preparing to carry a big stick. So work economically, Belt and Road, while you are engaging on an unprecedented military buildup that will allow you to translate that economic network into filling the vacuum that America will ultimately create in its network of alliances. And it's a very sound strategy. The problem is that there really are very, very few countries in the world which are naturally predisposed to be pro-Chinese. They're not, for a variety of reasons. That has now changed. And for the first time, it doesn't disqualify you from being, a socially acceptable individual to say, look, I don't have to be pro-Chinese, but can you now tell me why I should be pro-American?
Right.
Just tell me. I want to. That's where I want to send my kids, although apparently they may not be able to get into the colleges in which they've been accepted. That is where I would rather live, except that maybe they don't want me there to begin with. Accept that, accept that, accept that. And before, it was always, you could just say, almost glibly, how many people are knocking on the door to move to Russia or China? Well, okay, let's put aside Russia. China's a whole different animal. The quality of life there in many places is extremely good. If you're willing to give up, a lot of your basic rights and live in a surveillance state, China's not bad. And the education is very, very good. If America is moving in a direction that you're looking at and you're saying, well, that's not the America I thought I knew even a year ago, that's a problem. And again, I'm not saying this, this isn't about MAGA, this isn't about, the progressive left, et cetera, but for a whole host of reasons. The United States is suffering a crisis of national identity at a time when the Chinese enjoy it. And we're going to see that all of these self-inflicted wounds are going to just be seen as having been as inexplicable as calling out an airstrike on your own position when you're not even surrounded.
Right. I think when I read so many of the current event headlines and all this, I try to step back and analyze them through the lens of trade. And for me, that gets back to raw materials, which, has been your business for a long time, Tom. And the Belt and Road Initiative to me seemed like very strategic control over many important natural resource deposits. We talked about the weapons, United States weapons diplomacy. Advanced weapons are 100% reliant on Chinese processed rare earths. And, rare earths themselves aren't really that rare. It's the processing that's hard to figure out. And China's had 30 years ahead of us in that realm. And so, when I look at these current negotiations, just the last couple of days in London between Scott Bessent and the Chinese administration, part of me thinks they're just biding their time because they don't know who's going to be leading the United States in 3 years, but we know who's going to be leading China. And so if we can just, slow roll these negotiations for as long as possible, time is on the side of the Chinese. But, what's your take on resource nationalism, shifts in supply of raw materials today, many metals becoming much more strategic and items of national security than they used to be? One of China's Belt and Road initiatives was Indonesia, $65 billion into Indonesia's nickel market. And Indo now controls 61% of the refined nickel market. And for context, OPEC only had 51% of the oil market at its peak. 61's a lot, and it's climbing. How do you view resource nationalism and strategic raw materials today as opposed to the last decade?
Okay, so if I can take a step back to explain,
please,
where I am. The short answer to your question is that resource nationalism to me is the number one threat to what I would call, let's say, the Western mining system. It's not necessarily a threat to China or to Russia, et cetera, but to those of us who live still in something of a rules-based order where, contrary to suggestions, we're not free to engage in corruption, nor should we be, ever. For those of us who want to be in the global metals business, resource nationalism to me is number one. Now, let's take a step back. I began my career in the silver business and made the right choice of a great team of geologists led by Dr. Larry Buchanan, who found the San Cristobal deposit in the Department of Potosi in Bolivia. In those days, and for a while longer than that, I was one of the very few Americans, but nonetheless, one of the very few Americans who sort of got up in the morning and understood, go where the gold is, or go where the silver is, or go where the copper is. And being a historian, I could see that we were in a cycle that was going to benefit that kind of frontier spirits. And I made my first fortune in silver in Bolivia at a time when Bob Quartermain was running Silver Standard, Ross Beatty, Pan American. We were, the silver barons, as it were, and ultimately became best friends and brothers, in fact. But at that time, we were scouring the world for silver deposits, out of the money options, etc. I then parlayed that into investing in PGMs. First in Zimbabwe, I had a 10x, and I rolled that into a company I took control of in London called African Platinum, another 10x. And I thought, well, this is really great. I'd started my first company with a belief that silver could go from $3.50 back to 50. Worked. So I started an energy company when oil was at $17 a barrel, named it after my kids. And my view was oil was going to go to 100. And the conventional wisdom was that it was going to go to maybe a normative 12 to 15, perhaps even under $10 again, the early 2000s. I got very lucky in exploration. We hit. And then in 2007, I looked at the world and I said, things are too good. Sam Zell was sending out his Christmas gift, and it was a music box that was playing Liquidity is Raining on My Head, to the tune of raindrops keep falling on my head. And I sold the platinum company in the spring of 2007, and I sold the energy company in November of 2007, which was very, very lucky. And in 2007, I was at a private equity conference, and I was asked the question, why are you going to sell your energy company? Because I was public about it. And I said, because I think things are very, very good. I have 100x, and I want to crystallize that. Oil's going to 100, as I'd hoped, and gold is at 550. And I want to be able to have access to a currency that can't be duplicated. And I was asked by this young woman, Dr. Kaplan, you have so much conviction. Where do you think gold is going? And I said, my first target, my first equilibrium level is between $3,000 to $5,000 an ounce. None of those reasons for predicting that were based on what I would call the last refuge of the scoundrel, or promoters, resorting to the fear factors, the four horsemen of the apocalypse and all. No, just supply, demand, my view of gold as a currency, etc. And then she asked a very pregnant question, which will get to answer the question you're now asking. And she said, wow, where can you go wrong? And I said to her, in silver and in hydrocarbons, there were areas where I could see myself going wrong. But unfortunately, and this is the scary part, with gold, I said, I haven't found a way in which I'm wrong. I'm deliberately going out like Diogenes with a lamp, looking for an honest man or woman to tell me you're wrong. That is what I needed. That is what I was looking for. I didn't need people to echo me, but give me a choice. Well, here we are with gold now having breached the lower level of that band. And my view is that we are still in the foothills of a bull market in gold. Now, there are concomitants to that which have a bearing on the gold mining industry. If I'm right, in most countries around the world, gold mines will be nationalized as strategic assets, even if things are going well. I mean, we see this in West Africa, and unfortunately, resource nationalism is contagious. It's like potato chips. Nobody can eat just one potato chip. And I think that you're just going to find they're going to be nationalized. In some cases, it will be a salami strategy. In other cases, it will be outright. And there will never be any sympathy for a gold miner. So, you're basically living in a country with a hole in the ground. Sure, you've employed people, you've done all the right things. You may even have put that country on the map. like Randgold did with Mali, providing so much economic benefit. These are not countries which are given to expressions of gratitude. And the truth is that, to me, it's so important, having made my bones in South America, in Africa. I'm familiar with these places. Nobody could look at me and say, yeah, well, you're just a squeamish American.
Right.
No, really not. I come from the future. And what I'm telling you is you must focus on those jurisdictions where the rule of law isn't a novelty and which allow one to be able to ascribe what I call the sleeping well rule, which is to say, when I go to sleep at night, I know that when I wake up in the morning, what I thought I had when I went to sleep at night, I still own. And the reason why I think that's so important is not just the financial aspect, that it's horrible to get gold right, even get a project right, and then have it taken away from you. It's that, for me, at a certain point as an investor, I've done my arithmetic. I'm looking for people to challenge it and tell me that something has changed. But now the rest, the 80%, is the psychology. And psychology is about that ability to sleep well. It's about being able to maintain conviction so that you are not paralyzed or undermined and exit a position too soon. So for me, it went from, let's say, seek maximum leverage from an underlying thesis like silver or platinum or gold or whatever, to seek the maximum leverage to that thesis and the corollary ... in a jurisdiction that will allow you to keep the fruits of that leverage. That's what led me. And by the way, I have an incredible partner in the deal that we just concluded in NovaGold, where we wwe able to buy Barrick's 50% of the Donlin project in conjunction with John Paulson, in a way that has thankfully liberated us. It's the fifth time I've tried to buy it from Barrick, and this time it worked. But the beauty of Donlin, which John appreciated and has said many, many times, is that it gives him everything he's looking for. This gold is the big trade, and Donlin is the right vehicle, in the same way as the housing crisis, subprime with a big trade, and then you had CDOs and other instruments which allowed him to make 10 or 20x for his investors. And he views Donlin in that way, which of course is extremely congenial for us. And he's really, literally the ideal partner, both personally and professionally, because he shares completely our view on the asset. We have common interests, but we also share common values. He's one of the greatest partners I've ever known. And in 15 years, I have been nothing but astonished by what a stand-up gentleman he is. So I got really, really lucky. But it's extremely important to both of us that not only do we have the attributes in terms of the size and the grade and the mine life and the exploration potential, but that it's all located in the second largest gold producing state of what we consider to be the greatest jurisdiction in the world. As far as I'm concerned, that's the Holy Grail. And the only things I'm interested in are in the United States, Canada. I'm fine with Mexico. Australia's a fine jurisdiction. I have no problem with it. It's just a little complicated for us to get the kind of positions that we seek. And so we're sticking to our knitting in gold and silver. And silver's obviously been really good for us as well, too.
I just have to point out that yourself and Ross Beatty often point to luck all the time. Ross mentions luck all the time. Look, and I want to get into the Donlin project because if people aren't familiar, this is a 39 million ounce gold deposit in Alaska with grades that generally double the industry average. A recent $1 billion transaction between yourself and some partners. Before I get into that, though, I just want to reflect back on the nationalization concept you talked about, and because desperate times will cause desperate measures if desperate times occur. You opened up this conversation by saying, all currencies are effectively toilet paper. At least the United States dollar is double ply, right? Which means the others aren't. there's going to be currency crises. Likely, other currencies will get hit first. And in that event, if they're unable to inflate their currency any further to cover their obligations, but they have some gold deposits and operating gold mine within their borders, some countries will have to make that hard choice, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to offend our country's brand globally, but our back's against the wall, and we have a lot of wealth sitting right in front of us right now, and the mine's already built. And would you say that nationalization, like many things, are precedent-like events? We could see one country nationalize something important and say that's an unfortunate event in the mining sector, but more importantly, it sets precedent for other countries to get away with doing the same thing, and maybe that's a bit of a trend that occurs if it begins.
The best thing for me to say is everything you just said, I ascribe to. And it's already begun, and we haven't yet gone into the when the stuff hits the fan kind of mode. So think about it. It's already happening when the Dow is at record highs, global growth, and nonetheless, it's already happening. Now imagine if, despite the belief that the business cycle has been repealed, we ever have a recession again. I'm not even saying depression. We have a recession. Well, we've never had an economic downturn that was ladled with so much debt that would need to be worked through to be able to have anything resembling the catharsis that's necessary to reboot the global economy for another cycle of sustained growth. In that circumstance, your exports have been hit. Your industrial commodities may actually have plunged, but meanwhile, you have gold mines and silver mines that are churning out nothing but cash. Now, I'm comfortable with those countries where private property rights are enshrined. And there will be some who say, well, the United States confiscated, its gold, 100 years ago or so. And I would say yes. And now, when you make that kind of comment, just ask yourself, what's the context? The context was we went into the Great Depression in the 1930s, and gold was money. The dollar was convertible into gold. It was quite literally as good as gold. So to get control of the money, you confiscated the gold. In order for us to be at that point again, gold would probably have to be in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50,000, dollars an ounce to be even approaching some sort of an M2 or anything else like that. So Ask yourself the context. Along that continuum, you can keep on making, that investment decision. Do I still want to be in this mine or not? Because it may yet be nationalized anywhere. I'm not worried about the United States and Canada because we'll get plenty of forewarning, not the least of which people will have to talk about why they would want to confiscate gold, even if they could get along with it. Right. But for sure, the gold mines in the developing world, for the reasons that you just said, when your back's against the wall, you just do what you have to do to survive. And there was a really interesting comment that was made when Barrick was trying to renegotiate a deal with Papua New Guinea. And the prime minister said, as far as I'm concerned, all of my citizens are shareholders. I have to look out for my shareholders. It was actually a quite brilliant twist to the argument. I mean, I appreciate a good turn of phrase. And the truth is, that's all you need to say. I mean, a mine is just a hole in the ground. And, unlike a textile plant, you can't just up and leave to a lower wage jurisdiction. Or you can't, build a semiconductor factory. You just move to a place that gives you more subsidies. A mine is a mine is a mine. And it's location, location, location. I want to be somewhere where I know I can sleep well. But you are definitely right, and it is a trend. There is going to be no one in the developing world, as this trend continues, it's already happening when times are relatively good. When things get bad, if you ever believed that they could get bad again, this won't even be, they won't break a sweat in making that decision. Whether
Yeah.
they're a military junta, or, something a little bit more representative. They'll all do it, because if you're in a military junta and you continue to give a mining company you better terms than the one the neighbor got, you're accused of corruption immediately. Even your people say, well, obviously you're on the take. Now, if you're a parliamentary democracy in some of these areas, or just simply a parliamentary system, how can you get away with the opposition telling you, wait a minute, why did they get a better deal? We are allowing our resources to go to these people in Canada, United States, etc.
Yeah.
Who needs it? Just go to the United States and Canada to begin with, and just sit there and wait to be able to, count your money.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've seen the central bank's trend of gold buying just skyrocket over the last 3 years, right? Breaking sort of 40-year records. But not everybody's participating, and some countries aren't, or maybe don't have the resources to today. But yeah, wake up in I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years, and you realize we have a printing press inside our borders, and it's called a gold mine. We need that now. That's ours, right? And again, it's desperate times decision that would lead there. So let me get in, just last question on this thread. Then I really want to get into the Donlin project, because this is fascinating. But you hinted at, we haven't even gotten into the stuff that would hit the fan for a situation like that to occur. And can we just pull on that thread a little bit? What do you see from a currency risk standpoint, global economic risk standpoint right now, Tom, that would lead us down that path of desperation for?
Look, if somebody had told me a few months ago that I would witness, so many acts of self-immolation, I would have, I would have said, I hope not. But hope is a part of every strategy, should be, but it's not a strategy. And we have so many different threads which, if pulled, can lead to an economic downturn. And the results can be very unexpected. So, for example, let's just say, and I'm not saying this is the case, I think China, it's going to be their century. But let's just say you pull on that thread, and for a lot of structural reasons, you have a financial crisis in China. What's interesting, what can happen when you have a financial crisis in a rising power? How many depressions did the United States have on its way to global hegemony? The United States stock market was a trigger for the world going into a Great Depression in 1929, right? 15 years later or so, the United States was the global, not just superpower, the hyperpuissance, the hyperpower. So it was ironic. The world took us into a crisis. The United States came out as the winner. I'm not saying that this was, an act of volition or intent. Similarly, if you had a crisis in China, ironically, because the Chinese enjoy at this particular moment a greater sense of national purpose and national identity at a time when the United States and Western Europe in particular are riven by this sense of division. A Chinese financial crisis, and there are many others that could potentially happen in addition to China, but just take this one as being, a black swan event. A Chinese financial crisis could lead to complete social displacement in the West. That would lead to China being the acknowledged lead country, top dog. You have a number of these things which are being accelerated by America's not understanding those three pillars that we discussed at the outset. not understanding at the root, the thing that you need to do is to remember that the dollar is a con, and to be effective, you have to at least understand that you're conning. If you don't understand that you're the one carrying out the con, you are worse than the patsy in the poker game. Because at least the patsy in the poker game understands some of what's going on around, maybe not the whole thing. But at least someone in the poker game understands who the patsy is. The United States doesn't understand. It has not been the patsy. Those wounds that it suffered in Iraq, those wounds that it suffered in trying to remake Afghanistan in the image of the United States when you needed a simple, more traditional system like monarchy. All of these things, if you don't understand that, then of course you're going to make mistakes that cost trillions of dollars. Europe didn't tell the United States to invade Iraq. Europe didn't tell the United States to, try to nation build in Afghanistan. These were homegrown mistakes. So, when I look at the world, it's the reason why I'm analyzing how do empires collapse quickly. That's what I'm trying to understand. Maybe we can check in with each other and I'll be able to say something better than I don't know yet, but I think I'm on the trail.
Right. Well, there's obviously, there's a lifeboat that people go to when they don't know what's around the corner, right? And we talked about the central banks diversifying their reserves into physical gold for that reason. When you don't know what's around the corner, you want to be invested in something with zero counterparty risk, right? And that's the gold trade, right? And I think that the world's definitely clued into that over the last 4 or 5 years in a way they hadn't since I got in this business in 2011, right? It's been a sort of a slow grinding downward spiral until a couple of years ago, right? When I saw the news that yourself and your partner, John Paulson, were buying Barrick's interest in the Donlin gold project, immediately I thought, Tom Kaplan's buying his own printing press. That's what this is. That's how I interpreted that. You mentioned that this has been like a 15-year journey for you, though, to get this acquisition done, if I understood that correctly. And so I'd love you to frame that because that's fascinating. Job's now done. Transaction is closed. For anybody who has no context and did not see that news, could you walk us through from the beginning, Tom, and just explain the scenario?
With pleasure. I watched back in the early 2000s as an exploration project in Alaska called Donlin was producing some really extraordinary results. I wasn't a shareholder. I just watched from afar. I was a voyeur. And I watched the stock go from 50 cents, $1 to $16, I believe, when Barrick made a hostile takeover attempt in 2006. Again, I wasn't a shareholder. The shareholders rejected the bid, and the stock went into the 20s. As a consequence of several self-inflicted wounds, not on the Donlin project, but on ancillary gold and copper projects that were in the inventory of NovaGold, the stock started to crater, and then you had superimposed onto that the global financial crisis. So I was watching this happening, and I had sold my energy company at the end of 2007, and I was armed with massive conviction for gold, passion for the subject of achieving that through the leverage of mining assets, and I had capital, plenty of it. And I thought to myself, well, this company is now down to a $200 million valuation. I'll just buy it. And I had with me at my side the president of the Electrum Group, Igor Leventhal. Wonderful man, beautiful person on every level, personally, professionally, beloved. And he was the one who took on the mantle of saying to me, having had 2 great exits in 2007 in platinum to Impala and hydrocarbons to Encana. And he was the one who was on the chariot as I was, having my triumph. Just remember, thou art mortal, Caesar. And he said, now I want you. And I said, when should I buy NovaGold? And he said, well, let me put it to you like this. Peter Monk tried to buy this for $1.6 billion. It's now $200 million. Admittedly, we have a global financial crisis. People do not have an appetite to buy things, but you do. And you have this conviction about the company. What are the chances that he's going to let you get away with buying it for $200 million when he's still smarting from the fact that this was the first hostile takeover that Barrick ever lost? And he'll just walk you up dollar for dollar just out of ego. How much of your fortune are you willing to spend on that? Might you want to consider that we do a deal to get 40% of the company, but meanwhile, let's sleeping dogs lie. Maybe we can get this under the radar. And that's what we did. On December 31st, 2007, we made our first share purchase. We took control of NovaGold, which was about to go bankrupt. And so we were exempted from the takeover rules in Canada because we were engaging in, saving a company in exigent circumstances. The company had no credibility. It was a disaster. It had class action lawsuits, discredited management, no balance sheet, no analytical coverage, an environmental issue with an alluvial deposit that only could have been built with the advice of investment bankers, misleading the management that somehow you only get a premium valuation when you're a producer, which is complete nonsense. And we set our team to correcting that. And within a year or so, the stock was back to $15. Because that's what we do. We jump on a situation, go all in, roll up our sleeves. If it needs fixing, it's fixing. Some other things during the financial crisis, I took control of a company which had the Kibali project in Congo. I didn't take control. I became the largest shareholder. And I eventually sold that to Mark Bristow. And to this day, he'll say the only two people who believed in Kibali were Tom Kaplan and me. And he did a brilliant job in executing that. Astounding. In any event, the point was that for me, Donlin was everything that I wanted. And then the takeover occurred with a transition in my thinking away from go where the gold is anywhere to go where the gold is in a safe place.
Sure.
And here are the attributes. What is it that attracted me then? What is it that John Paulson, who has been in this story for 15 years and like myself, does not suffer from deal fatigue. You don't invest $800 million to buy directly in a mining project if you're suffering from deal fatigue. To the contrary, both of us have determined that for us, gold bulls who are looking for the vehicle where we can make 10 or 20x, Donlin is out of central casting for us. The one missing thing that we didn't have was complete freedom from the vicissitudes of fortune that came from Barrick's being the legacy partner that I inherited. So what are the attributes? Why Donlin? First of all, there's the size. 39 million ounces in M&I, plus another 6 million immediately adjacent to the pit. They're really starting with 45 million ounces. There's never been a gold project that began with 45 million ounces. Goldstrike, I think, eventually got to 40 million ounces. We're open to depth. We're open laterally. Exploration has been the way that I have made several fortunes through the drill bit. Barrick wouldn't allow us to drill a long trend. We have drill holes along an 8-kilometer trend that are mineralized. We can see, and this is a forward-looking statement, so just assume that that this is a hole in the ground with me as a liar on top. We can see easily 70, 80 million ounces maybe considerably more, along that 8 kilometers. The 45 million is located only on 3 kilometers of the 8-kilometer trend. Now, the really interesting thing is 95% of the property is completely unexplored. And my chief geologist, who made my big discoveries in Bolivia and in Mexico with the Gatos project, which was taken over last year by First Majestic, Larry Buchanan, when I sent him up to look at this after I'd done the deal with NovaGold, I said, "What do you see?" And he said, "Look, I see between 80 and 100 million ounces. But I also believe that the next Donlin could be at Donlin. As far as I'm concerned, this has the potential to be the new Carlin, the new Nevada." That was never in the interest of Barrick. For years, Barrick was very open in saying, "We hope that one day this will fall into our lap." But they were gentlemen about it. They never did anything to hold us back. And going into 2019, 2020, we were a $4 billion market cap company. We were outperforming the GDXJ. We were probably the number one performer of a gold development story. And then things changed. And we really got into a lot of arm wrestling, let's just put it like that, with Barrick after the Randgold merger. And we went from a $4 billion market cap company at $12 stock to 2 and change, because we couldn't move the project forward because Barrick's agenda was very, very different than ours. And, we can leave it at that because, you don't make money looking in the rearview mirror, as Louis Bacon would say. But suffice to say that we had one headwind. We had everything going for us. Federal permits, all state permits on track, fabulous management team. Greg Lang built Cortez for Barrick on budget, on schedule. Richard Williams built Pueblo Viejo, so much more complex. Biggest investment Barrick ever made, on budget, on schedule. Great management, great investors, great board. And we had one problem. We had a partner who had a very different agenda than ours. Well, now everyone really understands the issue that we were facing. 3 days after we announced that we bought Barrick's 50% share, and by we, I mean John Paulson put up $800 million to buy a 40% direct stake in the mine. He's also our second or third largest shareholder, depending on what's going to come up on the shareholder registry in the next few weeks. And so he knew Donlin inside and out. And we put up 200 million, and John allowed us to go from a 50 to 60% economic interest because he understood that the best way to crystallize value for his 40% share in the mine, not to mention being one of our largest shareholders at NovaGold, was for the NovaGold share price to go back to 12, 15, and then double again. I've had 100x returns in several different resources. A 10x on this to me is not going to be difficult. And we have the tailwind of not only having a great partner who's going to do everything that Barrick wouldn't allow us to do. Number one, update our feasibility study. Number two, our drilling will be to expand our resources, to look for the next Donlin in the 95% that's unexplored. This is, for us, it's more than game changing. That's, I don't want to be cavalier, but it's a transcendent moment for us. For those who don't know the NovaGold story, take a look at it because we are the ultimate special situation. I think we're the best gold development project in the entire world, but we're located in the second largest gold producing state in the safest jurisdiction in the world. The resources that we have, 45 million ounces, much more than that, great exploration potential. We will be producing over 1 million ounces a year with a mine life that starts in decades. This is more like a huge porphyry copper system that just keeps going and going and going. In the first 5 years, we will be producing 1.5 million ounces a year. in the United States at a time when the United States has named gold as a critical mineral, and the administration has put a spotlight on Alaska. And this is not about politics. We were permitted under the Obama administration. We've never had any government resistance. To the contrary, we were given our federal permits by the first ever joint venture between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Land Management. We're golden. The grade, as you mentioned, 2.25 grams, twice the industry average. Our cost structure, because of that grade, will be at the low end of the cost curve. With gold where it is, we have margins of thousands of dollars. And yet, it's all located in the United States. So everything I've just said, John Paulson has said publicly, because obviously, people are looking and they're saying, well, it's still possible that gold can go up a lot. I think gold can multiply and will multiply from here. And they're saying, what did John Paulson just do? This is quite a statement. And John will say, I think this is the best gold story in the world. And he just put his money where his mouth is. We literally could not have a more aligned partner. And the fact that we now have a 60% stake is a win-win for him, for us. And right now, one of the reasons I'm in London is because after years of being dead money, not only is NovaGold out of a coma, but people that we've never even seen before, and if you look at our shareholder registry, it's pretty stellar, are saying we want more exposure to gold, but it's really got to be in a safe place, in a safe, with a safe pair of hands. And whether it's our management or, I'm very well known to a lot of them because I've been in the business for so long. It's a complete renaissance for NovaGold. And while Greg Lang and team take the project up the value chain, I want to get it back on the valuation chain. I've got to reward the shareholders who stuck with us through thick and through thin by at least getting us back to the status quo ante before Rheingold took over, which was in $12 to $15 range, and then multiply it from there. And I'm very shameless in saying that's my agenda.
Yeah, no, I love the agenda. And my commodity university students, you guys will love taking a look at this one. And when Tom said 39 million ounces of M&I, we know that's the sort of highest confidence resource, the measured resource. 39 million plus 5. Sorry, and could you break that down for me? I might have missed that, Tom, when you said 39 million and then another 5 or 6 million just off.
So right now they're resources.
Yeah.
But with a few more drill holes,
right.
we put the M&I category as well.
Yeah.
We were so misaligned with Barrick, and they had an agenda, and their agenda was definitely not to add more ounces until they owned us, and definitely not to find another Donlin until they owned us. They could have taken let's just have this as a win-win. That wasn't really in the DNA, but now we're unleashed to be able to do what we know we can do. In terms of building mines in the Americas, we have more capacity than Barrick did because we had the best of the Barrick DNA that came onto NovaGold when they understood the nature of the asset, when they tried to take it over.
What do you expect is next in terms of news flow for someone whose their eyebrows are up and they're now curious about this project? What can they expect? We're going to do some more exploration, expand the resource, update the resource estimate. What can people look forward to, Tom?
All of that and more. So the first thing is the reason why our shares went from 12 to 2 and change were because we just couldn't see eye to eye with Barrick. Again, I think it's a function of agenda. It wasn't really project specific. And by the time the shares got low enough, last year, I hired Citigroup to prepare defense for us against a hostile takeover. And the reason why it was Citigroup was because they'd done the defense for Newmont. And so they knew Barrick inside and out. And they were the only bankers who weren't afraid to offend Barrick or had a conflict of interest. But then fortunately, I had a call with Mark, with whom I had a great friendship. And we made a deal where I could buy the other 50% for NovaGold's market cap, which had plunged from 4 billion to 1 billion. Willing buyer, willing seller. And the reality is that Barrick already has explained why they exited. They have 3 very large capex projects, Reko Diq in Pakistan, Lumwana in Zambia, and the Pueblo Viejo expansion in Dominican Republic. They couldn't move Donlin forward expeditiously, which really they had to, because the can had been kicked down the road for quite a long period of time. And the fact is that Barrick was in a repositioning phase of its growth. They said publicly that they were going to grow by, I don't remember the exact number, 30% or so, but 80% of that was going to be copper from Reko Diq and Lumwana. 3 days, 4 days, 5 days after the deal with Donlin, they renamed the company from Barrick Gold to Barrick Mining. All the people that I've seen over the last month, no one now asks me, where was Barrick's head? We know where their head was. They are trying to reconfigure themselves. Now, if anyone can do this, it's going to be Mark Bristow. One could argue about whether it's the right strategy or not, but executing that strategy, I don't know anyone else who could do this other than Mark Bristow. And regardless of whatever frictions we had, Mark and I texted this week. We're planning a celebration dinner, and I'm sure it's going to be characterized by a lot of flowing Bordeaux. But the truth is, I'm wishing him well, because I know Pakistan really well. At one time, I was the largest holder of mineral rights in Pakistan. That mineral belt is really, really, really great. The Tetian mineral belt is really great. The only question is, for me, at a certain point, I went from those kinds of jurisdictions being great to ultimately subscribing to Woody Allen's line, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. And I'm fine with being in North America, in gold. For me, that is the best way to protect my family's wealth and to make money for my partners.
Yeah, no doubt. Those are 3, I saw that news, of course, and I cocked an eyebrow. Barrick Gold moving to Barrick Mining struck me as interesting timing, just given how I felt about the gold market. Mark obviously has his conviction, and I'm sure it's very justified. And as you mentioned, if anybody can pull off that, it's probably him. Interesting. Tom, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm glad that we could make the time to have you on. And I feel like I'm doing my audience a service by getting the NovaGold story in front of them today. And once again, all the Commodity University students tear into this one, because what a great case study, right? Of first of all, the transaction, the deposit, the direction of NovaGold. Have a look at this. Let us know in the comments what you see, what you think, and if you have any questions, be sure to post them there. And I'd love to do a follow-up with you, Tom, a few months down the road as work programs are underway and revisit this one.
It will be my pleasure, Jay. And to those who follow you and your university students, what you're doing is a real service. The precious metals industry, the mining industry, requires more historical understanding. The way that you're going about it is extremely impressive. And when I asked Ross about you, because Ross, Bob, and I had a regular Zoom call a few days ago, and he just said, what you're doing is extremely special. And so rather than looking upon this, as any kind of chore, I was looking forward to it, and I appreciate the stimulating conversation. Um, you are definitely not a case of Kissingerian historical ignorance. You're shining a light, and bravo to you for doing it. Well done.
Thank
God
you.
knows your timing is great.
My timing was 2011, by the way, but now my timing is great. Yeah. Look, I sincerely appreciate that, Tom. And actually, do you have time for one more question? You jog my memory there. How much, I love the story of the silver barons, yourself, Bob Quartermain, Ross Beatty, going back to your project in Bolivia. How much of your success do you attribute to that peer group? I mean, you're still the three amigos. You've got the Jaguar ring. You guys are as close as ever. How much of your success in this industry do you attribute to nailing that peer group at that time in your career and sticking with it along the way? Because all three of you have had phenomenal careers.
All of it.
All of it. Yeah.
Well, the odds of being able to make a discovery that leads to a mine has been variously calculated at between 1,000 to 10,000 against you.
Right.
So the fact that I had beginner's luck with only the good sense to surround myself with people who truly, truly understood the geology and the engineering aspects of mining, whereas I was armed with a PhD in counterinsurgency, was a tremendously lucky event. And I know that you've had discussions about the significance of luck versus perseverance, but I've got to tell you, Ross would say that luck has been the only thing that he's been able to depend on. And it's not a throwaway line. We've had hours of conversation. The three of us were in India together for weeks earlier this year, looking at snow leopards and other things related to wildcat conservation. And we genuinely understand that la fortuna must be courted. And part of that courtship is a result of behaving ethically, living a life of gratitude, giving back. I know this sounds, sort of warm and fuzzy, but all of us understand that to get lucky in the mining industry, sometimes it's just luck. You can find a huge deposit, and it turns out that the metallurgy won't allow you to be able to develop it. So a lot of things go into this place. Just the fact that, you're not born in the Ogaden desert of Somalia and, suffering from hunger, but you're born to a family in the West, etc. Understand that. But in the mining industry, if I hadn't had that success in Bolivia, I think that would have been the end of me, and that's just the way the arithmetic works. It didn't take much more for me to be able to begin more forays into PGMs, silver, gold, hydrocarbons. But now I had the capital to do it. I wouldn't have been able to go into PGMs. I wouldn't have been able to go into energy if I didn't have that beginner's luck. How do you factor that when you're trying to teach university students? Napoleon is said to have remarked, give me lucky generals, not smart ones.
Right.
The ones who show up in the battlefield on time, etc. Just the right moment. We all acknowledge luck. And I generally tend to believe that those who don't acknowledge luck and just feel it's a function of perseverance, perspiration, and that's really it. It's all about you. I sort of think that they're going to, as the British would say, come a cropper. And it's good to be humble is maybe not the right word. I don't think Ross and I would describe ourselves as humble. Bob may be humble, but I think the other two. But I think you've just got to put yourself in perspective. The one thing that I would tell, I'm going to give you because you are teaching people, and I think it's so important, two things which I normally don't go out of my way to say. First one is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Save your answering a question for when you have real conviction and you believe that you're right. Otherwise, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, even when pushed. Because contrary to popular belief, even if someone says, I won't hold it against you, subconsciously they do if you get it wrong. So if you're going to get it wrong with something where the odds favor you. And if you get it right and you focus their attention on what you really know, your career skyrockets. The other thing that I would say is know yourself. Know your temperament. I know my weaknesses. That's why I have to come to a maximum conviction. If I have conviction, I can hold forever. If I can hold forever, it's always worked out with many, many, many multiples. You get the arithmetic right, and then you maintain your conviction. Know your personality. Some people are traders, not long-term. I don't like trading. I'm long-term. Know yourself. So if you're not afraid to say, I don't know, and then when someone says, yeah, but just yes or no, just say no. But if you want to know something about which I have maximum conviction, I'm happy to talk to you about that. And then you get to go in for the kill. That's how I made my first career, where people were asking me something. And then I said, but do you want to know why I think silver is not going to go down to 2 because of digital halide from 3.5, but we'll go back to 50? Yeah, okay, I'll listen to that story. And before you know it, you have George Soros as your partner after he's broken the Bank of England and stays a phenomenal partner for the decade that you're running that company. It's, a little bit of bravado, but it works. So, if I can be of any service by having imparted those two things, what it really comes down to is not so much humility, but just understand this. Ego is the enemy. I was very lucky. My father gave me, my mother actually, the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius when I was 14 years old. And here you had the most powerful man in the world sitting on the Danube. Rhine or the Danube? I think it's the Danube. And at night, he's writing his, quote, meditations. And the one that struck me when I was young enough to really be able to absorb it before I became, quintessentially, goofy adolescent, was just remember you're nothing but a grain of sand on a vast beach in a tiny fleck in the universe. Anyone who could have an ego after that is just really not getting the memo. Ego is the enemy. Don't let it get in the way of good decision making and treat people right. A handshake is a handshake. If you're known for that, then all of a sudden you have incredible people like Soros or Mubadala, our sovereign wealth fund partner, and John Paulson, who next time I see him, I'm going to be feeling his shoulder blades to see where those nubs are, where angels' wings should be. So that's another thing. Happiness is falling into a big hole in the ground in Bolivia and finding John Paulson as your white knight.
I love it. What a great wrap, Tom. Thank you so much for that. No, I thought that was such a great.
Best of success.
Likewise. Thanks again.
Most investors think they're playing it safe, following mainstream advice, chasing trends, and clinging to the herd mentality. But there is nothing safe about mainstream advice. The smartest investors know that real wins come from thinking independently and spotting opportunities long before the crowd. And that's what we teach at the Commodity University. This is an exclusive membership designed to arm you with the skills from the sharpest minds in the mining investment world. Each of our professionals has a proven track record of finding trends before anyone else. At the Commodity University, you'll gain access to a highly curated and growing catalog of courses covering what you actually need to know to become an informed commodity investor. Every single month, you'll receive a brand new course packed with insights from the best in the business, giving you the edge to stay ahead. If you're tired of following the crowd and ready to invest smarter, think sharper, and understand the mining industry like the professionals, then take the next step and join the Commodity University today.